So yeah, well, like I said, it was a large kind of topic, so I just broke it into two parts. We'll talk a little bit now about management, and just tell you there's a lot more to the management than I'll show you, but kind of just give you a high level view. You know, we need to ask ourselves why we're growing cool season forages. You know, that's the first thing we'll talk about. We'll talk a little bit about adaptation, forage quality, hit a little bit on the small grains and ryegrass, maybe some warm and cool season mixtures. Talk a little bit about tall fescue. Why grow cool season forages? Well, here's Oklahoma in summertime. Like this year, if we have a normal, year, everything's pretty green. A lot of Bermuda grass in this country. But, here it is in wintertime. And so unless we've stockpiled that and we're grazing it, we're feeding hay and supplementation. So, that costs us money. That's money out of our pocket. Takes a lot to maintain that cow out there. When we'd like to have something like this instead. So, we're trying to bridge that forage gap between when the warm season grasses are dormant and low quality to get us into that next summer. So we're going from fall to summer, trying to bridge that gap. Reduce our feeding of hay and supplementation. The more days we're grazing, that's better than feeding hay. Or if we're going to do hay from one of these crops, we want to make sure we do high quality hay. And that's where it comes in. Cool season grasses are always much higher quality than warm season. So make some very good hay. If you don't have that forage, how can you reduce supplement costs? Well, obviously you're going to be running around the countryside trying to find that hay. We could be stockpiling that perennial warm season grass, stockpiling that Bermuda. We could be stockpiling tall fescue. Maybe we're going to stockpile a cool season. Or else we're looking at sod seeding an annual cool season, or we're looking at planting winter annuals, or into a conventional tilled seed bed, or maybe we're looking to do a perennial, try to bridge that gap. Seasonal growth of selected forages. You kind of see this visually across the year. Our native warm seasons at the top, Plains Blue Stem, Caucasian, Bermuda in the green. You can see there's that gap between our cool seasons, which is in the red, and that's our legumes, cool season legumes and grasses. So we're trying to bridge that gap. Have that animal out there grazing as many days as possible. If we have cool and warm season grazing during months of the year, that's going to help reduce our annual cost by reducing purchase feed or haying cost. That's just a point I'm going to keep saying over and over. Cool season grasses are most productive. We look when they grow between about 60 and 77 degrees. Temperatures fall below 60 degrees Fahrenheit. They'll still grow, but that growth is slow. If we drop below freezing, that growth will stop. You can kind of see that growth pattern over the season there. If we look at it compared to warm seasons, the graph there on the right, you can see warm seasons obviously growing at much higher temperatures. Bermuda grass, that's a good example of that, 90 degrees. We get coarse out there when it can get too hot. But, for like Bermuda, we start dropping off at night below 70 degrees. That growth really starts to taper off. Warm seasons have warm season grasses growth rate is very high during that period, where cool seasons have a longer growing range or productive or longer, wider, more range of temperatures than warm seasons are. Forage quality. This chart says a lot. If you look in the red, that's kind of maintenance diet. In that kind of blue areas, moderate production and high production up there on the end. If we look at digestibility, bigger the number, the better. Of course, the legumes are the best. We're talking alfalfa. That's queen of forages, and there's a reason, and because it's out there in them legumes on that high end. Next are our cool season annual grasses, followed by our perennials. So our annuals, we're looking at maybe annual ryegrass, which is one of our most nutritious grasses we can plant. Or maybe it's wheat, or we're down to cool season perennials like tall fescue. And then compared to our tropical or subtropical perennial grasses like our Bermuda grass. Kind of another chart to kind of just look at ranges, alfalfa, crude proteins, TDN, total digestible nutrients. Usually much higher in our cool seasons over a wider range time period than they are in our warm seasons. much higher sugars, just like tall fescue here, kind of seasonally. You can see very high protein, high sugar. They're used in, that's why they're used, tall fescue is used in grazing dairies. So, to look at tolerance to acid and low fertility soils, tall fescue has a much better tolerance range to acid soil and low fertility than annual ryegrass does, and so does small grains. So that goes back thinking about what we're doing. We're planting this, some work was done at Oklahoma State. Same way with our legumes. This work was also done at Oklahoma State. Looking at arrowleaf, crimson, all the way down to white clover. And see, legumes are not very tolerant to our acid soils. This is why we want to correct that fertility or correct that pH, and then correct that fertility, especially with P and K before we plant. Ryegrass, looking at annual ryegrass, does poor on low pH soils. For small grains, really our bottom limit on pH is 5.5. If you bring a soil test in and you're at 5, we're going to have to correct that, or you're going to really be limiting that growth of that crop. There are some cultivars that are more tolerant of pH extremes, but you just have to find one that's for your area. There may not be one that's regionally adapted for your area. So a good rule of thumb, cool season grasses on average require about 60 pounds of N to produce about a ton of forage. So that's about 130 pounds of acre of urea. Wheat, rye, and trit planted for fall, planted for forage in fall. Fescue pastures, all in or small grains, they all do benefit from split applications in. Eastern Oklahoma, probably our top is about 150 N for the season. We're probably looking at splitting that in fall and spring and spreading that production a little bit. Ryegrass should be fertilized for spring growth. We get probably 75 to 80% of our growth on annual ryegrass in spring. So that's kind of what we want to look at capturing that production, especially if we've interseeded it into Bermuda grass. So cool season annuals, remember 5.5 is your bottom limit, can reduce production up to 85%. Watch that P and K. For planting, make sure we've got that in there before we start. But if we have to apply phosphorus after, we're probably looking at banding that or into that seed row for us, if we're doing some DAP. On most soils, nitrogen, we can make nitrogen applications pre-plant, but we're probably looking at split application there. For Eastern Oklahoma, it's usually from about 100 to 150 pounds an acre for total season. And like I said, we're looking at split applications, a pre-plant, and probably a top dress in February. And this shows that relationship for every ton of yield. This was done on wheat. Go up 60 to 120. We could jump that for about 1 ton of production. It's about 50 for warm season if we're talking Bermuda. Here's the same thing, same principle. So what cool season forage do we have that'll produce a ton? Well, if it doesn't rain in August, September, probably not many. But if it does, we're looking at our cereal, small grains, all the way from wheat to oats. We're also looking at annual ryegrass. Perennials for us, it's pretty much tall fescue, and then there are legumes. If we look at wheat, just kind of touch on each one of these. About most of the wheat yield produced in fall is about 30%. We're going to get rest of production going from March to May. If we look at complementary, there's a lot of interest in mixing small grains. Hey, wheat and cereal rye do good. They complement each other well. Most of our rye are very early maturing in the state. You want to watch annual ryegrass. They can be very competitive with wheat seedlings. Probably not a good mix. Varieties, there's many. Some wheat varieties are straight forage for graze out. Others are dual purpose. So it's just whatever fits your operation. If we look at cereal rye, like it's very early maturing, we get a lot of forage. Yeah.
So if you're going to mix those, do you just mix them half and half on pounds of seed, or how would you mix those?
So yeah, I've seen it mixed half and half, most common. There is some research showing that like you mix wheat and rye, you want to if you want to carry production out longer, maybe you'll put more wheat in the mix, maybe a 75 wheat and 25 rye. Since our rye is very early maturing, we might want to not have most of our crop mature in, early February, March. We might want to have more wheat and push that out into May. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay. So like I said, rye is very early maturing. We'll have most of our forage produced by February. We could get some, depending on the weather or a split application, we may get a little more production out to mid-April. Like I said, matures early in wheat, complements wheat. Also, ryegrass and cereal rye are good companions. By adding this annual ryegrass to rye, then you can increase that grazing season. If I was going to do cereal rye, I'd be planting that probably around 90 pounds to the acre. Then I'd have those, dribbling a little in the small seed box. I'd probably pull those tubes and dribble a little annual ryegrass as I was going along at about 20 pounds to the acre. That would cover that February to early May forage for us. A lot of varieties out there, common ones you'll see around here. Elbon, I think pretty much everybody gets anymore, but there are a few others. Foundation Seed of Oklahoma State has some that you can look at. Triticale, depends on the seed, whether or not people plant it. I like trits, cross between wheat and rye. You get the forage quality of wheat, the winter hardiness of rye. Does well on sandy soils, just like rye does. Want to avoid sandy soils with wheat. When planted, can produce up to 80% of its yield forage in winter. It's pretty hardy, but like I said, depending on the year, it depends on whether or not you can get seed. So it's been a little iffy over the years. There's a few out there. Some of the new ones coming out are beardless or awnless, which is a great idea. There are also some awnless wheats out there if you're just looking to graze out material. They can be irritations to the eyes of the cattle when they're grazing once it gets heads on it. Oats, I think oats are our most underutilized forage we have out there. Yeah, they are the least winter hardy of the small grains. They will show complete or partial senescence during winter months. Sometimes folks think they froze out, but they've actually just kind of senesced off. Most of our oats are very winter hardy anymore. Plant breeders have done a very good job for that. Most varieties of oat are facultative, what we call facultative, and that means they can be planted fall or spring. Most folks are used to planting oats in the spring as an emergency forage. They come up very quick, give you a lot of highly nutritious forage when you need it. But you can sometimes also use that in the fall as well. So we don't want to forget about our oats. Oats make good hay. That's why when you put them in the barn, oat hay in the barn, every critter finds it because everybody loves oats. So there's a lot of varieties out there you can look at. OK oats, been common around here through Oklahoma State for a long time. And there's some others as well. Plenty of information on these variety trials for small grains if you want to look for something in your region. When you do plant them, wait to about 6 to 9 inches before you get out there. If you want to kind of stockpile a little bit of that, you may want to wait until December or January, even later, before you put animals out there. If you're drilled these into small grain, drill these small grains into a warm season grass sod like Bermuda, you're not going to get a lot of production in the fall more so than you would in the spring. So we need to kind of think about that. Always leave if you do some limit grazing, maybe you're doing some put and take grazing or whatever, leave a little leaf area when you're moving your electric fences or whatever, and you can kind of stretch that forage a little bit. It's kind of a good way, even though it's an annual, it's a good way to stretch it as long as we can. Our cool season, this is just a basic grass trial from the annual grass trial from Noble Foundation, which they've done for many years. You can see rye, wheat, triticale, and oat production there. Oat's going to be our least productive of our small grains. Then I threw annual ryegrass in there. You can see we can produce a lot of forage with ryegrass. That's why it makes a very good mix with cereal rye itself. Also does a very good mix with triticale. Talk a little bit about annual ryegrass. That's one of our most productive and most nutritious grasses we can plant. Most of the production, like I said, comes in March and May. That's the only bad thing about it. Competes with wheat, complements cereal rye. You'll get very little production sometimes in the fall. You get about 1 acre would feed about 1 cow for 20 days. In March and May, we could really run that production up to 4,000 pounds. The acre forage is easily attainable with proper fertility. Now you're talking about feeding 1 cow for about 80 days in the spring. But we have to manage that. We can't overproduce ryegrass, really hurt our Bermuda grass sod if we've interseed that. So we need to think about that. Do not plant the whole ranch to ryegrass if you can help it, because you don't want to suppress your warm season grass. You want to make sure we got this annual ryegrass moved and we're ready for our warm seasons to come on. Here's fertilization on ryegrass. This is more Oklahoma State. You can see December through May, the yellow bars are 0 in, and then we got 186 units of N applied different months of the year, and applied, and you can see no matter what, we still get that burst of growth in April. So we need to plan for that when we got our livestock. So when we're mixing these things, remember nitrogen, if you've seeded ryegrass into your Bermuda, nitrogen applied before May is still going to favor the ryegrass and any tall fescue. If you have tall fescue Bermuda mix, nitrogen applied after May is going to favor our warm season. So we need to think about that application when we're doing our production. If you're doing ryegrass over Bermuda, we want to graze that down to our sod, looking at about 20 to 30 pounds broadcasted, could be no-till. If you've had ryegrass there before, you could probably cut that seeding rate in half because you will have some come back up. Sometimes running a light disc over it will encourage germination of ryegrass very well. Like I said, again, most of our production is going to be in late March, then early fall. When you're doing grazing ryegrass, kind of want to wait till it's 2 to 4 inches in height before we start. And again, kind of watch your grazing out there and prepare for that burst and of forage in the spring. Kind of the pros and cons of that. I've got a lot of questions lately on thinning Bermuda grass stands, and some of it has come from annual plantings of ryegrass in there over time. So we want to reduce our hay, and ryegrass is a good one to plant. You get a lot of production there, late in the spring. It's high quality, great for lactating animals, and great for stockers or replacement heifers, getting them high quality forage. Some of the bad things about annual ryegrass is controlling that burst of production. We can overproduce it, or we can underutilize it. Maybe we don't have enough cattle to deal with that production. And then we get shading of our Bermuda grass, and it's hard for our Bermuda grass to get going in the spring when it's got a foot of annual ryegrass over the top of it. Then we also lose some water in the spring because that ryegrass is growing. We don't control it. That's water loss to our warm season and loss of nutrients as well. So, annual ryegrass over Bermuda is great, but needs to be managed, and we need to watch that. Like I said, Bermuda grass is tough, but it's not invincible. It can't stand shading, especially over a 2-foot carpet of ryegrass. We need to control that with our grazing. Ryegrass, they'll use a lot of water in April, May. That's when Bermuda grass needs it for growth. When we'll work on our grazing control. And any nitrogen applied during active ryegrass growth, if you fertilize it too early, you're going to favor the ryegrass. So if you want your Bermuda grass to green up and produce fast growth in the spring, it's got to have the advantage. So you need to manage that ryegrass to give Bermuda the advantage in the late spring, or you're going to thin your Bermuda grass stand over time, or it's not going to green up for maybe 30 days late. So that's some forage you kind of lost. So we're watch our over fertilization during different times. Maybe like I said, don't plant the whole ranch. Just plant a portion for what you think you need. And like I said, you're going to require some grazing management to utilize all that annual forage you can, and watch our overproduction and underutilization. So we'll hit tall fescue, love it or hate it, still the best adapted perennial cool season grass we have. You can produce a ton of forage in the fall and pretty much 2 tons in the spring, almost with no fertility. But and it's also adapted to low, it can grow in low pH and low fertility soils to some degree. There is some toxicity problems that can be managed several ways with the friendly endophytes that they have out now, like the Max Qs, or we can use legumes. Works well in a year-round grazing system, and it's excellent for growing legumes. Little terminology you hear folks say, toxic tall fescue. Well, that's kind of like Kentucky 31, or what we call the wild type fescue. That's where we tend to have our, toxicity that you hear about. One answer to that was endophyte-free varieties, plants that do not have an endophyte. And then there's the novel or friendly ones that contain a novel or non-toxic endophyte introduced through plant breeding. A lot of these out there now, Arc Plus, Max Q, Protec, probably every seed company has one. People ask me sometimes what an endophyte is. That's that in the background. Those are plant cells. The little blue squiggly lines you see, that's actually the fungus growing in between those cells. It's only transmitted through the seed from generation to generation. It can't jump plants. Does not pass in the pollen. You can find it in the leaves, stems, and leaf sheaths of the plant and the seed. You don't find very little of it in the roots, but it doesn't transfer into pollen. So if a plant's naturally endophyte free, it's going to be endophyte free. But the plant next to it may have an endophyte. There's some good things with endophyte. They do produce some things that are natural insecticides and some things that help us with drought tolerant. Tall fescue can be very drought tolerant. But there's some other things it can produce that sometimes be harmful to our livestock. Fescue foot, that's picture one there, that can be caused by ergot alkaloids. It's produced by the wild type endophyte. Bovine fat necrosis is also another of hard fat layers in the abdomen that can cause some digestive problems. Here's a picture of the endophyte in the right from the electron microscope I threw in here. You can see it. That's how it goes up in the seed. So when you harvest that seed or that seed falls off, you just transmitted that endophyte to another generation. If that plant was endophyte free, that seed would be endophyte free. Has a great distribution curve. We can see here covering that forage gap in winter. And if we stockpile it, we can bounce up more during the winter time when it slows down, usually when our temperatures get around 32 or below it, but we have that stockpile growth. So it's good stockpile fescue in some places. There's some differences in fescue now that's kind of out there in the markets. We've got the continental types. These are like Kentucky 31 or the Jessups that you've heard of. But we live in a transition area. If you look at that map there, most anything east of I-35 is pretty much what we call the fescue belt. There's 14 million acres of tall fescue in the eastern U.S. Most of it's Kentucky 31. There are some novel and endophyte-free ones out in that area now, like the Jessup Max Q or Cajun 2. There's a whole slew of them. Mediterraneans now, that's a new one. You go west of 35. A lot of people are looking at that now. And it's a rainfall issue. If you're in Idabel, Oklahoma, you get 60 plus inches of rain. If you're in Altus, you might not get no rain at all for the year. But those type like Kentucky 31 will not grow in Western Oklahoma very well. That's why these summer dormants are more popular, giving these wheat producers a perennial option if they don't want to plant annuals every year. Kind of the rule of thumb is seen as, endophyte-free fescues, especially in eastern Oklahoma and the U.S. over time kind of fade. Their stands are not good. That's why you see the novel endophytes kind of persist more, is, the endophytes still giving us that drought tolerance and insecticide ability there without none of the harmful effects. Another way to get around the harmful effects is maybe you want to dilute it with legumes. That's why a lot of people plant clover into fescue. It's great complementary. You can dilute the ergot alkaloid because now they're consuming less of it. Red and white clover is most common. Plus, you're getting free nitrogen to that crop and up in that protein as well. So it's just another tool in your toolbox if you're not interested in the other varieties of fescue. Here's cattle on the left. It's on toxic Kentucky 31. Cattle on the right, it's on Jessup Max Q. You can tell Rough hair coat is common amongst Kentucky 31 pastures. You can see the difference there for just reducing that toxicity. Here's some data out of Louisiana. They're one of their grazing stations. You can see the difference, 2 pounds a day on toxic compared to 3 on max Q. This is common with any of the novel endophytes out there. And it's also the same if we look at cow and calf performance and replacement heifers. Those numbers just jump up from toxic to novel endophyte there, where we're talking about weaning weights or pregnancy rates. You can see that's a big one there. Cattle, 44% pregnancy rate on toxic fescue compared to 85 on novel endophyte fescue. So maybe if you're putting in a new planting, this might be an interest to you. If you have Kentucky 31 and you want to reduce the toxicity, maybe you're looking at interseeding legumes. So again, it's this rainfall issue. Talk a little bit about summer dormancy, which is in that green area. If you're along the I-35 corridor, this might be something you're interested in, or further west. Basically, when we talk about cool season grasses, you know, talking if you're talking fescue or Kentucky 31 or summer dormants down at the bottom, you know, during the summer, if you're out in Western Oklahoma and you're in Kentucky 31, you just keep trying to grow and eventually you'll die. I mean, there's just not enough water there for you to keep going along with the heat. The summer dormant has a mechanism to escape that. It just doesn't grow at all in the summer. It completely shuts down. On the left is summer dormant type in the spring, and that's the same field in the middle of summer. That's endophyte-free fescue, but its escape mechanism is it just goes dormant. You could spray glyphosate over that field, clean it up if there's any weeds. It just goes dormant and just rides out the summer heat. Comes fall, it begins to grow again. So this is really targeted for the I-35 corridor and to the west, but it is showing up some producers using it. Kind of the difference of the two, there's summer dormant on the left. It's a finer leafed plant than the Kentucky 31 types most people are familiar with on the right there. So you can see the difference in the leaf blade. This is some data from the Noble Research Institute, especially if you look at net return per acre, they're at the far end of that chart, especially compared to graze out wheat. Kind of making a little bit more net return per acre. And a lot of that is due because you only plant this once. You're not planting it every year. So the cost into planting every year is something you figure in where planting a summer dormant or any other perennial cool season grass, maybe it's orchard grass, we're going to make money over time just because we're not burning that fuel. We don't have that wear and tear on that equipment each year planting. So that's one thing you need to factor in too, is the economics of what you're doing. So the Mediterranean types are out there. They're different from the normal Kentucky 31 types you've seen. They're endophyte free and they're persistent, so they have no livestock disorders. So they're, you know, not everything's the straight Kentucky 31 tall fescue. The grazing programs are pretty much the same though. You're looking at nitrogen application prior to Labor Day. You want a soil test for maximum production. Probably looking at about a split application like we talked about earlier, 60 to 80 pounds in to start with in fall, and then top dressing again later in spring. You know, you could get up to 1 cow per acre for 50 to 100 days, depending on the cow and the rainfall. So grazing strategies and fertilization strategies are pretty much the same. You can limit strip, great for rotations, has excellent forage coverage. Some people creep feed on it. You know, again, we need to watch our growth. Remember, we get below 32 degrees for the middle of December. You know, get some hard freezes. It'll shut down, turn yellow, look a little bit like wheat, but it will recover and begin to grow. If you got toxic fescue, it's best to keep seed heads off of them. You know, whether you clip it or whatever, that's where most of your toxicity is. So it's best to always keep your native tall fescue grazed down where you don't see much seed heads. Never get down below about a 4-inch stubble is what I like to see. If you cut fescue for hay, don't cut it as low as Bermuda. Raise that cutter bar up, leave you about 3 to 4 inches. It is a bunch grass. You need to keep some of those leaf material around the crown for it to grow. You can stockpile it. This is actually some stuff from Bob Woods, who used to be the old Northeast OSU Extension agronomist. predecessor to Brian Pugh. He did some work in Northeast Oklahoma with stockpiling. Again, he fertilized prior to Labor Day. He made sure that pasture was clipped off first because he didn't want any old growth out there. Put 60 units in out there. Looked at what he had. Did this up in 10 Northeast counties back in 2001. He had an average fall fescue production of about 3,129 pounds of forage to the acre. If he had an unfertilized check, you can see we had about 2,100 pounds. He was about 2,100 pounds higher than the unfertilized check. So he produced a lot more. He stockpiled that. He kept animals off of it until November, December. So he had a lot of forage sitting there he used. Maybe he was going to cut that for hay or whatever he's planning, had an extra load of animals come in. And if it don't rain, well, don't worry about it because that fertilizer will sit there until spring, and that tall fescue will utilize it then. And just a little bit about legumes. If you got legumes in your pasture, most of the pasture legumes will produce the bulk of their forage potential in March and May. You get fall, so a lot of our legumes are fall limited. Like I said, if you've got a pH below 6, correct it, or don't waste your money buying the legume seed. Correct the phosphorus and potassium. If you got alfalfa, you want to check that potassium every time you take a load of hay off that field. That's a lot of potassium that's off that field. So you need to watch that. If you plant it in warm season grass side, like I said, watch your height and allow your seedlings a chance to survive or get going before you graze. Watch your herbicides. Herbicides are hard on legumes. If you need to control weeds, do it prior to planting of the legumes. It's hard to, when you got a grass and legume mix, it's hard to, there really ain't anything we can spray over the top of that to control a lot of different things. It's just, if you got grass and legumes, you're going to have some weeds. So you just might as well get used to it. Get some fall and winter grazing from legumes, but like I said, the bulks will be in the spring. You'll get some, if you want to know how much nitrogen you get, you'll get some fixation depending on soil conditions, type of legumes, and growing conditions. You can get nitrogen fixed anywhere from 20 pounds an acre to the year to maybe up to 300 pounds the acre, depending on conditions in the legume. If you want to know where that nitrogen is, most of that is in the leaves and the stems of our legumes. It's consumed by the animal. Animal breaks it down. That's crude protein. There's some escape, and that's recycled in the form of urine and manure back on your field. Grass obtains some of that nitrogen as well, and also obtains it when the legumes die over time and regenerate. And so you'll be getting some of that. You do lose some of the atmosphere, but they'll give you nitrogen credits. Reduce the nitrogen and fertilizer bill on your pasture. Yeah.
I wasn't paying attention a while ago, and we had a question came in. It said bird's foot trefoil is the legume. Notice that is, will it add nitrogen back?
Yes, bird's foot trefoil is a legume. It will add nitrogen to the pasture. Bird's foot trefoil is also very high in tannins, and so it has very low bloat potential. I'm not going to talk about bloat in this. That's kind of like another talk, but yeah. So bird's foot trefoil you don't really see around here. You'll see it more north. Maybe get up Kansas and Nebraska. It's just it's probably one of those legumes that you can plant it and it might come up, but it's probably not going to last very long here. We just don't have we're just too hot. Just too hot during the winter and stuff. It just doesn't do well. But yeah, beware of your legumes. Soil test. See what you got there. Nitrogen is high, so credit what you got out there and get a soil test. Bring it in. That way, hey, save yourself some money. That's why we put them in there, to increase the quality of our pasture and get some of that free nitrogen. Let them work for us. Then I just put this here, talking about some of the legumes and the end contribution. Alfalfa and clover is 1 plant per square foot, 12 to 15 inch tall. We could have up to 1,000 pounds an acre from those plants over an acre, plus 20 to 30 pounds of free nitrogen credits. So, like I said, it varies by plants and conditions and the plant frequency or stand frequency of legumes too. But so yeah, let them work for us. And just end this here, just summary. Hey, the reason we're doing these cool season grass and legumes, we want to reduce that hang cost. We want high nutrient forage, fill that forage gap. Small grains, early establishment is key to fall forage production. If you want to plant some wheat and rye, I hope you're thinking about it right now, because I mean, it's going to be on top of you here in a couple of weeks. You know, watch that fertility. Hey, healthy soil, fast fall plant growth, high spring production potential. Usually waters are a limiting factor in a lot of cases. So, you know, if you no-till, that's great. If you're doing mixed species, choose two forages that complement each other, you know, like cereal rye or ryegrass. You know, just kind of saying, let's don't rob Peter to pay Paul. So, you know, we need to, if we plant ryegrass with wheat, we're probably going to lose those wheat seedlings. Dedicate separate pastures to either cool or warm season production, even if they have both types. And what I mean by that is if you got a Bermuda grass, maybe most of your operation is Bermuda, and you oversee annual ryegrass, remember at the end of the day, it's still Bermuda grass pasture. So you need to manage it with that idea that you don't want to lose your Bermuda. Tall fescue, you know, like I said, love it or hate it, it's the cool season perennial forage we have. We have a lot of it. Toxicity problems from hot tall fescue can be managed several ways, and these are tools in your toolbox. You might want a new variety, and that could be novel endophyte or endophyte free. Could be one of the summer dormant, or you could use a legume. Maybe you want to plant a legume in there, reduce that toxicity. Sometimes just by simple grazing actions, we can reduce our toxicity on just straight Kentucky 31. Tall fescue is one of our best bets to work in a year-round grazing system. Hey, if you got Bermuda and you got tall fescue, you know, we can budget that out for the year. Less days feeding hay. We want to keep those animals grazing on pasture. And if you're going to grow legumes, hey, fescue is great for that. They're excellent companions. And with that, got any questions? I try to answer them.
Any questions for Mike? If you want to just mic up and ask them. One of the things I guess I would bring up is if you are considering starting here pretty quick, planting a cool season crop, you probably need to be scouting for those armyworms even right now and seeing what the populations are looking like. Kind of getting a feel for where they are and when they're hatching in your area, and being prepared to spray them. If you're not spraying them in your Bermuda grass hay fields, if you do drill some of this wheat and rye, you're definitely going to want to be spraying for them then.
Yeah, that's a good point. Lots of reports of armyworms across the state, and these new seedlings you plant, whether it's perennial or annual, they're gonna like it. So you need to watch.
Yeah. You know, that Bermuda grass that's established, if they mow it down, it'll come back. But these little seedling plants, they're not. So
yeah. And you know, I'm hearing now that some co-ops are having trouble keeping the chemicals into spray, so we need to be aware of that.
Yeah, I was told that today. I was asking, is Prevathon, is it still on the market or is it gone?
I think there's a little bit of it still floating around. You know, most up this way, there's been, you know, of course, a lot of people, if they don't have a private applicator's license, they've been leaning to 7 or like those type of carbo products, or maybe malathion.
What about Dimilin? What will Dimilin have any effect on armyworms, or is it just grasshoppers?
Yeah, it'll have an effect on armyworms. But we need to be aware of also with some of these that they're less effective depending on how far along the armyworms are. So, yeah.
Because that was one of the things they were looking. I've had some guys wanting to try to find something with a little bit of residual.
Yeah.
Not just contact, but there's just not many things out there for.
No,
my chemical guy, he was saying one called Durant. Have you heard that one?
What was it again?
Durant.
Durant?
Like the town, yeah.
I hadn't heard of that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's it's kind of getting to be the Wild West up this way. People trying to find chemicals. And, so, yeah. And, yeah, it's pretty much that way, I think, eastern Oklahoma. So hopefully you've got some stocked away, or, you might think about latching on to source, because I guarantee we're going to have some, army worms are just probably hanging out waiting for us to plant some winter forage.
Yeah, and most of the guys that I know, they kind of keep their sprayer hooked up and maybe even water in it. Just all they got to do is add the chemical and get ready to spray, because by the time you realize that they're coming, you don't have a whole lot of time. So
No,
it's not really time to go try to figure where your sprayer is and get it all rigged up and check it for leaks and all that. That's not the time to be doing that if you're going to spray.
And just, the folks on here, best time to look for these army worms. They're very active early in the morning, late in the evening. Kind of get out early, wet dew on your shoes, walk around the grass. More likely you're gonna have something stuck to your boots. You can kind of get an idea if they're there or not. During the day, heat of the day, they can be kind of hard to find, but they kind of get down in the lower parts of the plant or in the thatch or the top of the soil and kind of hang out there. But early in the morning or late of evening, a good time to scout.
Well, while we're wrapping up here, I'll go ahead and tell everyone that our next meeting will be September the 16th, and that will be on forage supplementation and forage production to match your Kevin season, whether it's spring or fall. And our speaker will be Earl Ward from Muskogee, and Earl will cover those topics. And so it will be September the 16th at 6 o'clock, and we will get you a Zoom link for that. And so last chance for a question. Kenneth, thank you. Kenneth said good information, took lots of notes, and said thanks. And appreciate that. Appreciate everybody being on here. I'd like to thank Mike especially for being here with us this evening. And Mike, I have to say, this is my first chance getting to listen to you give a presentation, and you did an excellent job. So
thank you.
Very, very, very proud of the job you did, and thought you did a great job. And so I appreciate that. So without anything else, I think we are through. Mike, thanks. Everyone have a good evening. Hopefully you get some good rain, and once this is out, get a little more hay put up. So have a good week.
See you, everyone.